Hey guys, I'm Paul Rabelais. I'm an estate planning attorney helping our clients throughout Louisiana get and keep their legal affairs in order. And in this video, we're going to talk about when it's appropriate to designate an individual trustee of a trust. So in another video, I talked about making the case to designate a corporate trustee. This is going to be, though, about the individual trustee. So let me get a few things out of the way, and then we'll really focus in on that decision as to whether to designate a corporate trustee or an individual trustee of a trust that you are creating. So there are certain types of trusts where really in every instance you're going to name an individual trustee. Let me give you a few of those examples. Every time it's going to be an individual. So let's say perhaps in your will or revocable living trust, you want to leave, and I'm pulling these numbers out of thin air, $25,000 to your grandson to be used for his education. And then if there's anything left, maybe he can get it when he's 25. Well, when you're leaving an amount like $25,000 or $10,000 or $50,000, in trust, you're gonna always there's always going to be an individual who's going to be the trustee of that trust. It's just not enough money, quite frankly, to warrant having a corporate trustee with all of the fees and professional services that they provide as a trustee. Another circumstance where you're going to name an individual trustee almost every time is a lot of parents have a piece of land or a farm, and it has sentimental value to themselves and to certain of their descendants. So they want to leave that farm or that land or that LLC that owns the farm or the land. They want to leave that in a trust for their children or perhaps for their children and grandchildren. And one of the reasons they want to do that is they don't want that one rogue child or grandchild to be able to sell their interest in that property. So they leave it in trust and maybe name the responsible child, for whatever that means, as the trustee of that trust. Again, designating an individual to be the trustee of that trust. Doesn't make sense really to name a corporate trustee. There's just no money for the corporate trustee to manage. They likely decline that designation anyway. Almost always see an individual trustee or co-trustees in your typical avoid probate revocable living trust. Mom and dad set up their revocable living trust. They don't want the survivor of them or the kids to have to go through two probates. So they set up their trust and they transfer their home to their trust and their investments to their trust. And then when both of them pass away, maybe one or more of the children are the individual trustee or co-trustees. Maybe all of the children are equal principal beneficiaries. And that trustee's role is simply perhaps to sell the house and make sure everything gets divided up equally among the children. A very temporary position, likely to have individual trustees there. Many people set up trust to get assets, technically out of their name for future Medicaid eligibility purposes. Probably not enough assets in those trusts to warrant, the costs and services of a professional trustee. So in virtually all of those instances, when you set up a trust, in those instances, you're likely to name an individual trustee as the trustee. But however, when you leave a significant sum of money, and again, significant is a relative term, but you leave a significant sum of money for a child, for grandchildren, for children, for nieces or nephews, and now we're talking, I don't even know if we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars here. We're talking maybe $1 million on up. That's when there's this determination, perhaps that should go through your mind, as to whether you should have an individual trustee or a corporate trustee to be the trustee of that trust to handle that significant sum of money. In the other video, I talked about kind of making the case for the corporate trustee, but many people make the case for naming an individual trustee. Mom and dad, one or more of the children just can't handle money. So mom and dad say, well, we want to leave it in a trust for our child or for our children. Or maybe they want to do the same thing for their grandchildren. And they often kind of they know they have options to designate an individual trustee or designate a corporate trustee, but they're either not familiar with corporate trustees, they've never had any dealings with them, or they're scared of corporate trustee fees. And they may say, Paul, we have our niece Nancy. Let's name Nancy as the trustee of that trust for our child, for our children, for our grandchildren, for our other nieces and nephews. Nancy's she's an accountant and she's responsible and she's very organized. We think she'd be the perfect trustee for that trust where we're leaving this significant amount of money to our descendants in some form or fashion. So people kind of justify that, I think, mainly for two reasons. One reason is they're worried about the trustee fees that corporate trustees will incur. So on one hand, they're thinking, let me do the math, that corporate trustee is this % of the trust assets each year. That, I'm doing some math. Wow, that's a big trustee fee every year. I'm frugal. I don't want to name a corporate trustee. Where on the other hand, not to make the case for all corporate trustees, but the corporate trustees, they know what they're doing. They're going to invest the money. The investment performance over the long term will likely far offset any kind of fees that are incurred. So, but the initial gut reaction of many people when they're setting up trusts are, I've never dealt with a corporate trustee and I'm worried that it's going to be really, 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 really expensive. So that's one reason people don't use corporate trustees and they kind of go to the individual trustee by default. Another reason, and perhaps a valid reason, why people select individuals to be trustees of trusts that will hold a significant sum of money down the road is perhaps that niece Nancy, who's the individual trustee, perhaps niece Nancy is more familiar with the needs of the particular beneficiaries of the trust. Mom and dad who are setting up this trust can have a conversation with niece Nancy. Niece Nancy, we've designated you as the trustee. We're leaving $500,000 to each of our grandchildren in this trust. Here's what we'd want you to spend the money on for our grandchildren. We want them to get an education, but we don't want, them to abuse this trust. And so niece Nancy, here's all our guidelines and here's how we'd like you to exercise the future discretion that you will have. And they're more comfortable with niece Nancy. They know niece Nancy, but they don't have any idea who the corporate trust officers will be who will be exercising discretion in future years. Again, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm not saying what's best or what's right. I'm just telling you what people have told me for 30 years and what's going through their mind as they kind of justify these trustee designation decisions that they're making. So all that being said, what are some of the solutions? I know in the future people are going to continue to designate individuals as trustees because of they think that it will save money. They are familiar with the individuals that they are designating. They're not familiar with corporate trustees and corporate trust departments. They've never dealt with them before, so they're going to keep designating individuals. So if that's you, then yes, you can continue designating those individuals. Maybe a couple of areas where you could step it up a notch and improve, kind of the long-term solution here is maybe give that individual that you designate the ability to designate his or her successor trustee. Maybe that individual, when the time comes for them to be the trustee, maybe they're not in a position where they can best do it or they even want to do it, but you trust them. So maybe they can designate that successor trustee, whether that's an individual or a corporate trustee. Maybe think about selecting co-trustees, and some people will name an individual for certain purposes like making distributions to the beneficiary because the individual knows the beneficiary better than the corporate trustee does, but using the corporate trustee for investment decisions, keeping up with the economic and tax environment, taking care of all of the accountings and legal requirements that trustees are required to fulfill. So there's that option of a co-trustee situation. And then virtually in every trust instrument, there's typically some provision that says, in the event of a vacancy in the office of trustee, maybe you named niece Nancy first, and then maybe you named a backup to niece Nancy. Maybe you even went one step further and named another backup to that person. But typically there's some default provision in every trust that says in the event of a vacancy in the office of trustee, then a corporate trustee will be appointed through some mechanism there. So those are some options that you have. It is an important decision when you're setting up a trust, if it's going to be a trust that's going to hold a sum of money for many years or decades or even generations, to get that trustee designation right so that the money's handled the right way. It doesn't go anywhere. My dog's Max is barking. But hope that helps. Again, there's a corresponding video that gets more into the corporate trustee designation. This one's more focused on the individual trustee designation. I'm Paul Rabelais. Hope that helps.